So people can have many different theories about love, but what does it actually look like in practice? St. Martin of Tours was a young Roman soldier in the 4th century. He's riding along on his horse in the coldest part of winter, and he sees a beggar sitting by the side of the road near to the gates of the city. Martin's got nothing to give him, but in a moment of inspiration, he draws his sword, cuts his cloak in half, and gives one half of the cloak to the beggar. That very night, Martin has a dream. And in this dream, he sees Jesus wearing the half of the cloak that he's given to the beggar. And Jesus says to the angels, "See how Martin has clothed me in his own cloak." It's a true story, and it's a beautiful symbol of the love of neighbour that all Christians are called to. Jesus said, "You must love your neighbour as yourself." Then he went further and said, "Love one another as I have loved you." And he went even further and said, "Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you." It's a radical call to love without calculation, without conditions, without expecting any reward in return. It's tough, and sometimes it's hard to expect. It's a love of sacrifice that sometimes calls us to something that seems to be beyond the call of duty. But it doesn't mean that we have to become everyone's doormat. Sometimes we need to stand up for ourselves, to stand up for others, to stand up for justice. And it doesn't mean that life is without joy. So many of the encounters that Jesus has with others are full of joy. There's this lovely phrase, life grows when it's given away. And in fact, we often experience that the more we give, the more we receive. Mother Teresa was a nun in India, teaching in a girls' school, doing great work. But one day she felt an inner calling. She felt that she was called to leave the safety of the monastery and the school and to go out into the slums of Calcutta to serve the poorest of the poor. She wanted to be with those who had nothing, to share their lives, and to bring the light of Christ into the darkness of the slums of Calcutta. She brought the sick and the dying into her homes and cared for them. She educated the abandoned children she met and gave them food and hope. She gathered nuns, sisters around her so they could share in this work in some of the poorest places in the world. Mother Teresa went beyond the walls of her settled life to seek out her neighbour in the poorest of the poor. She is such a beautiful example of Christian love and selfless joy. We may not follow exactly the same path that she trod, but we can seek to love others as she did and to give our lives in the service of others, in the ordinary circumstances of our own situation. She was simply following the example of Jesus himself. At the Last Supper, he took off his outer garments and went down to wash the feet of his disciples. It's a symbol of humble service as the Son of God goes on his knees before us. But it's also done with great tenderness and compassion. He is a friend amongst friends, a brother amongst brothers. In the Bible, the story of the Good Samaritan is probably the greatest illustration of Christian love. A man has been beaten, stripped, and left abandoned by the side of the road, and a Samaritan stranger is the only one who's willing to cross the road and help him. He's moved with compassion. He goes to him, he binds up his wounds, and then he cares for him in the local place of lodging. The Good Samaritan goes the extra mile. His love is kind, compassionate, generous, practical, selfless. It is a sacrificial love, but it's full of such tenderness and affection as well. This is the kind of love we are called to have for others, for those who are close to us, who often can be the most difficult to love: family, colleagues at work, neighbours. For those we see every day but maybe never acknowledge. For the stranger, the unexpected visitor, the foreigner. And especially for the poor, the sick, the lonely, the unloved, the elderly, the dying. This is what it means to love your neighbour. This is what it means to love as Christ loved.